In the heart of the bustling city, where towering skyscrapers cast shadows over narrow alleys and the hum of traffic never seemed to fade, lived a stray cat named Mira. The city was always alive, always moving, but for Mira, it was a lonely place. She was just another stray, slipping through the cracks of the city's chaos, unnoticed among the rush of people and noise. Her days were spent scrounging through dumpsters, dodging cars, and finding small pockets of shelter wherever she could. Mira's fur, once white with patches of brown, was now dirty and matted from her life on the streets. For months, she had survived like this, alone, hungry, and wary of people. But recently, things had gotten harder. Mira was pregnant, and her once nimble body was heavy with the kittens she carried. Her strength was fading, and every day was a struggle to find food not just for herself, but for the lives growing inside her. One evening, as the sky darkened and the city lights flickered on, Mira's time came. She had wandered into an alley between two old buildings, seeking refuge from the noise and chaos. In the farthest corner, she found a discarded clay pot, likely a planter someone had thrown away. It was cracked and worn, but it was dry inside, and it was the only shelter she could find. Mira crawled inside, her swollen belly pressing against the cold surface, and with the sounds of the city echoing around her, she gave birth to 3 tiny kittens. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion for Mira. She rarely left the safety of the clay pot, except to scrounge for scraps in the alley. Her body was weak, and she didn't have enough to keep her kittens fed. Each day, their tiny cries grew louder, desperate for the nourishment she couldn't provide. Mira tried her best, but her own hunger gnawed at her, and the cold of the autumn nights seeped into her bones. She curled tightly around her kittens, shielding them as best as she could from the harsh world outside. But the city can be cruel, and as the days went on, Mira's strength continued to fade. She ventured farther and farther in search of food, leaving her kittens alone in the clay pot longer than she wanted. On one particularly cold and wet evening, she returned to the alley, her heart sinking as she realized she had failed to find any scraps. The kittens, mewling weakly, clung to her, and Mira feared the worst. She curled around them once more, trying to keep them warm with her failing strength. Her world was narrowing, becoming smaller and darker, and the sounds of the city felt far away, like a dream slipping through her paws. She was running out of time. Then, in a stroke of fate, something changed. That night, someone happened to walk down that very alley. Jane, a young woman who lived in the nearby apartment building, had taken a shortcut on her way back from work. She was tired, her mind focused on her phone, when she heard the faintest sound, a tiny, pitiful meow that barely pierced the noise of the city. Jane stopped in her tracks and looked around, her heart clenching at the sound. She followed the noise deeper into the alley and soon spotted the cracked clay pot. Inside, she saw the small, frail form of a cat huddled around her kittens. The sight broke her heart. Mira looked so weak, her ribs visible through her dirty fur, but her eyes were wide and pleading as she looked up at Jane. Without thinking twice, Jane rushed forward, her phone forgotten in her pocket. She crouched by the pot, whispering soft words to the scared cat. Mira, too tired to run or protest, simply lay there, trusting this stranger with what little energy she had left. "You're not staying here," Jane murmured, gently picking up the clay pot and cradling it in her arms as best as she could without disturbing the kittens. "We're going to get you somewhere safe." Jane hurried back to her apartment, her heart racing. She didn't have much, but she knew she couldn't leave Mira and her kittens in that cold alley. She set the pot down carefully on her kitchen floor, rushing to gather old towels and a shallow dish of water. Mira, exhausted but sensing that this strange woman meant her no harm, relaxed into the makeshift bed Jane prepared. Over the next few hours, Jane coaxed Mira into drinking water and eating some soft food. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. The kittens, still too small to do much but mew and squirm, nestled into the warmth of the towels, their tiny forms no longer shivering from the cold. Jane knew she couldn't take care of them all by herself for long, so the next morning, she called a local animal rescue. When the rescue team arrived, they marveled at Myra's resilience. They gently scooped up the family and took them to their shelter, promising Jane they would give them the care they desperately needed. Weeks passed, and Mira slowly regained her strength. In the safety of the shelter, she was fed, bathed, and cared for. Her kittens grew stronger too, their once frail bodies filling out as they nursed and grew into playful, healthy little cats. And Jane? She visited every week, checking on Mira and her kittens, her heart warming each time she saw their progress. One day, after a long talk with the rescue staff, she made a decision. When the time came for the kittens to be adopted, Jane couldn't bear the thought of them being separated. So, she took them all, Mira and her 3 kittens, back to her apartment, where they would never have to worry about cold nights or empty bellies again. The city outside still moved at its relentless pace, full of noise and chaos, but inside Jane's cozy apartment, there was peace. Mira and her kittens, now named Snow, Patches, and Bean, curled up in soft blankets, safe and loved for the first time in their lives. Mira, once a lonely stray, had finally found her home.